Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard.
Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on the podcast today. Her name is Barbara, and she is with a monument for an election reform in Rockford, Illinois, which is where I went to high school. I graduated high school there. So I'm excited to connect with her today, and I trust you will love what she has to say. So welcome to the podcast, Barbara.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Barbara, kindly give us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Well, I am a retired elementary music teacher, and I have worked most of my career here in Rockford, Illinois, and I love teaching music to children. I have a family of 2 children and enjoy travel and gardening and reading books. We are an activist group who promotes empowering women. And our group became a part of another coalition in 2019 that met just to get together to have our women's groups in our city know each other. And these are other groups like League of Women Voters and Alpha Kappa Alpha, for example. And we came together in May of 2019 because we thought, the anniversary of the 100 years of women receiving the right to vote is coming up next year, and we should do something about that. So our group came together just for ideas and for how our town could have a celebration in honor of the 100th year anniversary.
Oh, wow. So for our audience who didn't come from Rockford, Illinois, a lot of people, everyone knows Chicago and Illinois, and Rockford is, from my experience, is not as well known. So if you could give a brief overview of the demographics of Rockford, what the city of Rockford is like in your view, that would be awesome.
Okay, Rockford is a city of about 150,000,
right.
Surrounded by some other smaller towns, and we are up near the Wisconsin border. So if you go from Chicago up I-90, you would come to Rockford, Illinois. So it's a beautiful city on the Rock River and has a lot of beautiful farms and forest preserves and a lot of trees in the city. It's known as the Forest City. So we feel lucky that we have such a beautiful place to live.
Sure. I ran cross country in high school in Rockford, Illinois, and we ran around the trails a lot, so that was a big part of the experience. So I definitely remember that part about Rockford, Illinois.
Mhm. And we have added more trails every year, and
really,
our city parks are very beautiful also.
So, Barbara, before we talk about your monument in particular, I would like to talk about the women's suffrage movement. Our podcast talks about election reforms a lot, and we are focused mostly on the contemporary ones, yet we also like the historical ones that succeeded. So since the women's suffrage movement was one of the most successful election reforms in history, what would you say made that movement successful that we could learn from today?
Well, one thing is, and I'm not a history teacher, although I love history, and so it's been interesting to learn about the suffrage movement over this 100th year anniversary year. One has to realize that women's suffrage had a very long arc. Even in the early 1800s, even women were talking about wishing they had more control over their lives in terms of salary and in terms of rights for children and so on. And the movement kind of officially began in 1848 with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony meeting and others in Seneca Falls, New York. But from 1850 then, say, to 1920, that's 70 years. One has to realize what a long, long struggle this was for women to gain the right to vote. So I would say it wasn't easy, and there were obstacles at every turn and every year. So that's one thing, is to realize the very long historical arc of the movement.
Good point. That's something to think about, because, like the saying goes, you didn't build Rome in one day, so some movements may take years and decades and even centuries to get into place.
Yes. Women were very determined to have more control over their families. I think that was the main point that I learned from visiting Seneca Falls. It wasn't that they wanted the right to vote per se, it's that they wanted the right to vote so that they could enact laws that benefited women's empowerment. So control over money in the family and control over children, and rights of the family, the right to own property, these all came with the right to vote. So the vote was sort of a peak desire because it affected everything else.
Sure. So kindly describe the process of getting this monument in place and getting it erected. You talked about earlier how you got involved in that organization. It was AAWU, is that right, or did I get it wrong?
Sorry, that was a little mixed up. AAUW, American Association of University Women. And
okay,
that's
AAUW.
a group that I'm involved in.
Okay.
Yeah.
You talked about how that led you to where you are today. So kindly describe how the monument in particular was the way you just determined to honor the women's suffrage movement, how that process went into place, and how you decided to, and how you put it into place.
Well, our coalition of women's groups, we had just invited every women's group to be a part of this coalition, and those who responded and sent committee people to work on it, we really wanted to have education in the year 2020. So we were planning to have, all kinds of educational things in the library and in all our women's groups, and we wanted to invite each other to all the 2020 celebrations that celebrated the 100th anniversary.
All right.
And as a part of that discussion, we discovered that there was no monument to a woman in Rockford at all.
Wow.
So we thought, as part of this celebration, maybe we could do something about that. So we began to, besides the educational factors, we began to envision something more concrete. And it was a process all the way, but through contributions of our different women's groups, the Women's March in Rockford, and other people who were artists. So we felt that we could come up with a plan and raise the money for a monument to be built in Rockford that told the history of women's suffrage. We have famous suffragists here in Rockford. I mean, we wanted to honor our local people as well as the national figures.
So to build a monument, how did you get the land to do that? Did some members donate land, or how did that come about?
Well, we had the project, and then we talked with many of the city entities to see where our project might end up. And that was a long process also. We ended up with a very beautiful spot along the Rock River behind the YMCA. Okay. And it's along the bike path also, which means that many people just naturally walk by it. That was all a long process of conceiving of the monument and then finding an appropriate spot for it. And we considered city parks and other the history museum in town, all those different sites. So in the end, we were very lucky to have the site along the Rock River and along the bike path. It's become a meeting place for women's groups and for a lot of different groups. People like to just pause there and look at the monument, and it's next to the Log Lodge of the YMCA. It's a gathering place for the city, and we just love its spot, its situation.
Okay. So kindly describe this monument specifically. What is it? What is it? How do you describe it? What does it look like? What's on there? We aren't a video podcast, so we can't show pictures of it. So if you don't mind describing it to our audience, we'd appreciate that.
Well, it's a monument that's 15 feet tall. It has 3 sides, and it's surrounded by 6 benches. That's also part of the evolution of the whole project. The monument was at first supposed to be a sculpture.
Okay.
We began to investigate artists, and through one of our coalition partners, Women's Space here in Rockford, we discovered artist Susan Turner, who is a mosaic artist. And the more we thought about it, the more we thought, the mosaic would be a good idea, also because the artist Susan, loves to do projects that are built by the community. So she wants community involvement in her projects, and she has several of her projects in several of the cities around our state.
All right.
So our project evolved with design people from Women's Space and other artists contributing. We had many meetings over the next year to decide what to be on the monument, what should be on the monument. We have a local suffragist, Kate F. O'Connor, who was kind of our town's most famous suffragist. And we decided to have her be featured on one of the sides.
Oh.
The African American women in our coalition wanted us in particular to remember how difficult it was for minorities, people of color, Native Americans, women to have the right to vote. Even after the amendment was passed in 1920, it didn't mean that all these women had the right to vote because of discrimination against them and Jim Crow laws, etc. So we eventually decided that the second side of our monument should feature someone who was involved in the civil rights movement leading up to the Civil Rights Act of 1965. So the second side is dedicated to Dr. Constance Good, who was a local educator and a voting rights activist. Then the third side of the monument is dedicated to women of the future. So it has the faces of several young women. We love how it turned out that, we are doing the past and the future as a part of this monument. And all of this is created in mosaic tiles. So there's a whole process of the creation of the art part of it. We say our monument has 3 features. It has boating and history, it has mosaic art, and it has the community, because it's all about the community and community members built it. So we try to talk about those three subjects as we tell people about the history of the monument.
Sure. So for the mosaic tiles, what is the process that they needed to do to make those for the monument?
Well, there was a color scheme chosen because the suffragist color scheme was purple and white and gold.
Right.
So that forms the background of the 3 sides. The process itself involved 8 by 8 tiles, which Susan chose all the colors, and she has a formula for cutting the tiles into certain shapes because that affects the flow of the whole piece. So many of our volunteers actually helped in creating the small pieces. So all these 8x8 tiles had to be cut into small pieces. Then the edges are ground. Then they can be used to create a picture on the monument. So it was a continual process of cutting more tiles, grinding them, and then they could be used to create the next section. You have to remember also that this plan was supposed to begin in the early winter of 2020, and then what happened in 2020? All our plans were upside down because of the pandemic. So, but we continued anyway. We had a warehouse where our tables were separated with space, and people could come in and work just on a certain section. And so our process was slowed down, but it went forward. And we have over 225 volunteers who helped in one way or another with this sculpture. So like 100,000 tiny tiles were cut. We're talking about maybe in about the size of 2-inch squares, or they're not squares, but 2 inches and smaller pieces would be something for people to envision how to put together all those tiles back into a picture.
So that was put together in a warehouse, you said, right? Those tiles were made in the warehouse, right?
Yes, we had tile cutters, and then the process of putting them onto the picture that you're going to create after the tiles are cut, and then people start looking at the graphic image of a part of the sculpture. So there's the face of the woman who's being created, and there's all the surrounding elements that go with that. We also had people create small pieces, maybe within a 6-inch square, and these were like roses. The suffragists had yellow roses as their symbol, and sunflowers, and we're the home of the Rockford peaches, so we created peaches. We created stars and hearts, and those small elements. Those are all on the sculpture as well, because the tower comes from like a bench, like round circle, and so the bench has some of these small elements. The base of the bench has a picture of 34 different women who were chosen to be what we call the foundational women on the bench. So when you look at the sculpture, you see a round bench-like shape, and around that are the pictures of the foundational women. Half of them are from Rockford area, northern Illinois, and half of them are national figures in the suffragist movement. So, and in the civil rights movement. Also. So then the tower arises with its 3 sides from the center of that, and then at the top is the women's symbol, which people are familiar with.
Sure. So how tall is it?
Pardon?
How tall is it?
It's 15 feet. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Wow. So it's on top of top of the tallest people it towers over them. Wow.
Well, we're very proud of how it turned out. It has a few glittery tiles in it. It reflects light. When you visit different times of the day, it's just beautiful. And even at nighttime with the light shining on it, it's very beautiful too.
Sure.
So
how much is admission to visit this?
Is there an admission, you mean?
Yeah, how much does it cost for the general public to come look at it?
Well, it's absolutely free. It's just along the bike path there, which has many people walking along it all the time. So it's absolutely free to visit anytime.
Good. That's good.
It's very accessible from the Y parking lot, YMCA parking lot.
So how do you protect it from damage and vandalism?
Well, the process of creating a sculpture that is going to be an outdoor sculpture. Susan Burton, our artist, has worked on that technique for quite a number of years. So the sculpture is made of styrofoam blocks, and then it's covered with several layers that make it impervious to weather. Then when you apply the tiles to it, then you again grout it. The tiles are, mosaic tile is a very old form of art that is for outdoors as well as indoors. So the tiles themselves are impervious to the weather, and then the grouting has to be perfect, which Susan helped us all learn all these processes of the art, creating the art form. So it's meant to be outdoors, and it looks beautiful at any time of day or night, and sunlight especially.
Oh, so. Sure. That sounds good. I imagine it feels a great sense of accomplishment for you and the other members in the organization to have such a project, work on it for that amount of time, and then have it succeed.
Yes, it was certainly a process of love from all of us who besides doing the work of it, were fundraising for it to get the money, and we had many community partners who gave generously as a support to have a monument to women in Rockford. And so we are very thankful and grateful for people's support in actually creating the monument, but also the support of all the raw materials and the construction project and having a crane to put the sculpture in place after it was built. So we had planned that it would be dedicated on August 18th, which is the anniversary of the 100th Amendment. But we didn't make that date because of our slowed down process in the year 2020. But we managed to dedicate the tower on October 31st of 2020. Along the way in this process, our group kept meeting, and our artist friend Susan would say, it would be so beautiful to have some benches accompanying this. And she suggested that we might think of that, and we eventually thought, yes, that sounds like a great idea. And at the same time, we were becoming more skilled in doing tiles. So we planned 6 benches just around the monument. And they are very beautiful representations of things in Rockford. They are meant to give a sense of place to the monument. And they reflect, the tops of the benches reflect buildings that are part of Rockford's history. So very fun to have the experience of doing these benches. And the whole process of creating was just a very fun thing for everyone involved.
Awesome. So our audience...
Susan...
I'm sorry, go ahead, I cut you off.
I was going to add one more thing about the benches. Since we have the Rock River, the element of the river flows on all the 6 benches. And then we have trees. We have trees that for our forest city. And then the buildings that are represented sit within that background. And so the outside of the benches and the inside of the benches are tiled. The outside of 3 of the benches has the words of the amendment, so that right there you bring the focus of the voting, because it's all about the voting, right?
Yeah.
So the focus of the amendment is right there, and then telling the story of the people who were involved, and then telling the civil rights part of the story, and then telling the story of part of our city's history too, with the women who are represented on the monument.
So it sounds like it's a misnomer to think of the women's suffrage movement as culminating with the amendment that was passed, because, like you've been talking about, it was a section of women that got the right to vote. So the women's suffrage movement was a multifaceted effort. So it happened in stages where the white women got the vote first and then other women got the vote later.
Yes, and women actually had the right to vote, but African American women in particular were prevented from voting. And some of the other minority groups did not have the right to vote until some later rules were changed. So
Okay.
recognition of their citizenship along the way. So yes, it would be accurate to say that not everyone was able to vote from the 20s on,
Okay.
just because the amendment had been passed.
Sure. So whether it was they were legally prevented from it, or whether in practice people prevented them from it, it took a while for all women to have that right that the white women got.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good thing to reflect on and to remember about that. So since
Well,
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
the civil rights part of the story is so important to
Yes.
today's history as well.
Yes.
And of course, having access to voting is still very important today. Is the most important thing. So when I give a talk down at the plaza, I say this started out with the voting, and it's all about voting still.
Yep. Good way to put it. Our audience members are involved in political parties and non-partisan political reform organizations, so they do need to raise money. So since your organization, your coalition was so successful at raising money, what tips do you have for our audience who has to raise money as well?
Well, I imagine that every situation is different in that regard. I think because we started out with 15 and more groups who are part of our coalition, and then we have networking within the community.
Okay.
And we loved how our 15 or so women's groups that were meeting became friends and remained friends after this project. So we feel like our city is better connected as a result of this. At least our women's groups are, because we had this experience of doing this monument together.
Oh, sure.
So I think, networking within your city and building the support for what you're trying to do. Every city is different, and every city has its own story,
Sure.
and its own grassroots people
Yep.
to make things happen. So I'm very proud of our women's coalition that accomplished this sculpture. It was a big thing to do, and we finished it. Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Good job. And like you said, you had the big COVID hurdle to get through, yet it didn't stop you. You
Yes.
did it. That's good.
So the benches were dedicated in 2021, and every year since then we have had a celebration of some kind on August 18th, and we love to give talks down at the plaza. So we have our committee members are available about any time, really, to if someone's visiting our city and would like to have a talk at the plaza, or we give talks for Girl Scout troops or church groups or any kind of groups that come together to learn about this historical part of our city.
Okay. So if our audience is interested in that, how would they arrange that? Would they visit your website, or how does that work?
Yes, we have a website, and we are listed on our city's walking tours and through the to the area arts council, and our email address for tours is listed on our website. A lot of information is listed on our website. Actually, you can see pictures of how each part looked as it was being assembled and then applied to the monument, and you could see pictures um, of the sculpture being lifted by a crane onto its base, onto its permanent site. You can have, there is a document available about the foundational women as to why we chose these 34 women on the base of the sculpture, and then actually there are a couple more on the benches also. So we have a document that you can read about of these historical figures and women who contributed to our city in the arts or in politics or in education. So there's a lot of information on our website that people can access.
Okay. So what's the website address again?
What's the address?
Yeah, for the website.
Rockford Women's Suffrage Plaza.com.
Okay.
Actually, I think that's been shortened to RockfordSuffragePlaza.com.
All right, fair enough. I plan to put that in the show notes.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Sure. So, Barbara, we thank you for coming on the podcast and talking about this monument to one of the most successful election reform efforts in the history of the United States.
Well, and I want to mention one thing I forgot, and that is the list of our coalition partners is also on the website.
Oh,
and
okay.
I didn't say every group's name.
Yeah, that'd be a lot.
And it's kind of a long list, but I hope that people will look at the website and reference all the individual groups that were a part of our coalition.
Sure.
And thank you very much for asking me to be on.
Our pleasure. We're glad to have you. Barbara, we wish your coalition and the monument continual success, and may it continue to inspire, educate, and inform people in the future.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much.
All right. Wish you all the best. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.